The shadows of Delilah Smith's tears cast dark rivers down her pale cheeks as her trembling fingers clutched the wedding gown her father had forced upon her like a burial shroud. In less than an hour, she would be Mrs. Victor Blackstone, wife to the most feared man in Lyndon, Kansas, unless a miracle occurred. Lyndon, 1878, was a town built on cattle drives and railroad money, where fortunes rose and fell with the price of beef and the availability of water. Delilah had grown up watching her father's once prosperous ranch dwindle after her mother's passing 5 years ago. At 22, she had managed the household, helped with the books, and prayed that somehow they might recover from the drought that had nearly destroyed them all. "You look beautiful," her father, Thomas Smith, said from the doorway, his voice flat and emotionless. He was a shadow of the man he once was, the laughing, loving father who had taught Delilah to ride and read the stars. Now he was gaunt, his eyes haunted by debts and desperation. "Please don't make me do this," Delilah whispered, turning from the mirror to face him. "Victor Blackstone is a monster. Everyone in town knows what he did to his last wife." Thomas avoided her gaze, his calloused hands twisting his hat. "It's done, Delilah. The papers are signed. He's paid off our debts. The ranch is safe." "At the cost of my life," she replied, her voice breaking. "You'll have security, food on the table, fine clothes. No more worrying about where the next meal will come from." "I'd rather starve," Delilah said, but there was no fight left in her voice. She'd argued for weeks since her father had announced the arrangement. Victor Blackstone, 45 years old, with a face carved by cruelty and a reputation soaked in whiskey and violence, had offered to save the Smith ranch in exchange for Delilah's hand. "The carriage will be here in 20 minutes, Thomas said, retreating from the room like a coward, unable to look his only child in the eye. When the door closed, Delilah collapsed to her knees, the white satin pooling around her like spilled milk. She had always imagined her wedding day would be filled with joy, perhaps to someone like Kit Williams, the cowboy who had been sweet on her since they were children. But Kit had left Lyndon 2 years ago, heading west to make his fortune, promising to return for her. Letters had come for a while, then stopped. Like all dreams in Lyndon, that one too had dried up and blown away. The little white church on the edge of town was full when Delilah arrived, not with well-wishers, but with the curious and the pitying. Victor Blackstone stood at the altar, his dark suit expensive but ill-fitting over his heavy frame. His beard was neatly trimmed, but nothing could disguise the coldness in his eyes or the way his mouth twisted into what passed for a smile when he saw her. He owned half the businesses in Lyndon, had the sheriff in his pocket, and collected debts with ruthless efficiency. As Delilah walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she felt like a sacrificial lamb. Her friends, those few brave enough to attend, watched with sorrow. Mrs. Holloway, who had taught Delilah at the schoolhouse, wiped away tears. Old Mr. Jenkins, who remembered when Delilah's mother had walked down this same aisle beaming with joy, shook his head sadly. The Reverend, a thin, nervous man who owed money to Blackstone like most everyone else in town, cleared his throat as Delilah took her place beside her soon-to-be husband. She could smell the whiskey on Blackstone's breath, even though it was barely noon. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, his voice quavering slightly. Delilah closed her eyes, silently begging for deliverance. The church was stifling in the summer heat, the scent of lilies cloying and funereal. "We are gathered here today." The doors of the church burst open with such force that the wood splintered, sending shards flying across the polished floor. Sunlight poured in, silhouetting a tall figure in the doorway. "Stop!" The voice was deep, commanding, and achingly familiar. Delilah's heart stopped, then raced as the figure stepped into the church. Kit Williams stood there, dusty from the trail, his blue eyes blazing with determination. He wore a gun belt low on his hips and his boots were spurred. 2 years of hard living had broadened his shoulders and hardened his jaw, but there was no mistaking the man she had loved since she was 16. "This wedding will not happen," Kit declared, striding down the aisle. The congregation murmured in shock. Blackstone's face contorted with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are, boy?" "The man who's stopping you from forcing a woman to marry against her will," Kit replied, his gaze never leaving Delilah's face. "Hello, Lila," he said softly, using the nickname only he had ever called her. "Kit," she whispered, joy and disbelief warring within her. "You came back." "I made a promise," he said simply. Then, to the congregation, "Everyone here knows what kind of man Victor Blackstone is. You all know what happened to Sarah Burns after he married her." A hush fell over the church. Sarah Burns had been found dead at the bottom of the stairs in Blackstone's mansion less than a year after their wedding. The doctor had called it an accident. Everyone else called it murder in whispered conversations. "You watch your mouth, Williams," Blackstone snarled, reaching inside his jacket. But Kit was quicker, his hand moving to his holster. "I wouldn't," Kit warned. "I've learned a few things out west. Drawing faster is one of them." Blackstone hesitated, calculating his odds. "She's mine legally," he said, looking to Thomas Smith for backup. "Her father signed the contract." Thomas stepped forward, looking from Kit to his daughter. For the first time in years, Delilah saw something like courage flicker in her father's eyes. "I was wrong," Thomas said. "No amount of money is worth my daughter's happiness, or her life." A muscle twitched in Blackstone's jaw. "We had a deal, Smith. Your ranch is mine if this wedding doesn't happen." "Then take it," Thomas replied. "We'll start over." "Delilah," Kit said, extending his hand. "Come with me, now." Without hesitation, she gathered her skirts and crossed to him, taking his hand. His palm was warm and calloused, just as she remembered. Blackstone lunged forward, grabbing Delilah's arm with bruising force. "You're not going anywhere!" Kit's fist connected with Blackstone's jaw with a sickening crack, sending the older man staggering backward into the altar. "Don't ever touch her again," Kit said, his voice dangerously low. The sheriff, Blackstone's longtime ally, rose from his seat, hand on his gun. But he froze when he saw that half a dozen men in the congregation had also stood, their expressions making it clear they would no longer stand by while Blackstone terrorized their town. "Let them go, Victor," the sheriff said reluctantly. "It's not worth bloodshed in the house of God." Blackstone wiped blood from his split lip, his eyes promising retribution. "This isn't over, Williams, not by a long shot." Kit's arm circled Delilah's waist protectively. "It is for today. Tomorrow's another matter." With that, he led Delilah back up the aisle and out into the blinding Kansas sunlight. A horse waited, a magnificent chestnut stallion stamping impatiently. "Where are we going?" Delilah asked, suddenly aware that she was still in her wedding dress, the town watching from the church steps. "Anywhere but here," Kit replied, lifting her onto the horse before swinging up behind her. "I've got a place. It's not much, but it's a start." As they rode out of town, Delilah leaned back against his chest, feeling safe for the first time in months. But she knew Blackstone would not let this humiliation stand. Their troubles were far from over. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as Kit urged the horse across the open prairie, putting as much distance as possible between them and Lyndon. Delilah's wedding gown billowed behind them like a flag of surrender, the irony not lost on her that she had finally escaped one man's possession only to flee with another. "We're heading to my homestead," Kit explained, his breath warm against her ear as they rode. "It's about 20 miles southwest of here. Not much to look at yet, but the land is good. There's a creek that runs year-round." Delilah nodded, trying to process the whirlwind of the past hour. "How did you know? About the wedding?" Kit's arms tightened around her waist. "I got back to Lyndon 3 days ago. Heard the talk in the saloon about Blackstone forcing you into marriage. I couldn't believe your father would agree to such a thing." "The drought hit us hard," Delilah explained, feeling a need to defend her father despite everything. "We were going to lose everything." "So he sold you instead?" Kit's voice was hard. "He thought he was doing what was best," she said, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. They fell silent for a time, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats lulling Delilah into a strange calm. She watched the landscape roll by golden fields of prairie grass, dotted with wildflowers that had somehow survived the punishing heat. In the distance, a line of trees marked the creek Kit had mentioned. "I wrote to you," she finally said, "for months after your letters stopped. What happened?" Kit sighed, a sound filled with regret. "I went further west than I planned. Ended up in Colorado territory working a silver mine. There was a cave-in. I was trapped for 3 days. By the time they dug me out, the man who was supposed to carry the mail east had been killed by Apache raiders. I was laid up for months after that, barely able to walk, let alone write." Delilah turned slightly to look at him over her shoulder. "You could have sent word when you recovered." "I did," he said simply. 3 letters. When I got no response, I figured you'd moved on, found someone else." "I never got them," Delilah said, her mind racing. "Blackstone, he owns the mercantile where the mail comes in. He must have intercepted them." Kit's jaw tightened. "That explains it. All the more reason to get you far away from him." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in stripes of orange and pink, a small cabin came into view nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees. It was rough-hewn but solid, with a porch across the front and a corral for horses off to one side. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney. "Someone's there," Delilah said, suddenly tense. "That's just Jasper," Kit reassured her. "Old trapper who's been helping me get the place set up. He's harmless." As they approached, the door to the cabin opened, and an elderly man with a wild white beard stepped out, squinting at them. His weathered face broke into a smile when he recognized Kit, then registered surprise at the sight of Delilah in her wedding finery. "Well, I'll be damned," Jasper called as they dismounted. "You actually did it, boy. Thought for sure Blackstone would have put a bullet in you." "It was a close thing," Kit admitted, helping Delilah down from the horse. "Jasper, this is Delilah Smith. Delilah, meet Jasper Cooper, the best tracker this side of the Mississippi and a fair cook besides." Jasper removed his hat and gave an awkward bow. "Madam, you're even prettier than this love-struck fool described." Delilah blushed, suddenly self-conscious in her elaborate dress. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Cooper." "Just Jasper, madam, and it ain't my place to be hospitable with. I'm just passing through, helping Kit get established before I head on to Oregon." He gestured to the cabin. "Got some stew on the fire and cornbread in the oven. Figured you might be hungry after your adventure." Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but clean. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs dominated one corner, a stone fireplace another. A curtain separated what Delilah assumed was a sleeping area from the main room. Everything smelled of fresh-cut wood and the savory aroma of Jasper's stew. "It's not much," Kit said apologetically, watching her reaction closely. "It's perfect," Delilah replied honestly. After the opulence, Blackstone had promised an opulence that would have been her prison. The simple cabin felt like freedom. As they ate, Jasper regaled them with tales of Kit's exploits in the territories, how he'd struck a modest silver claim, enough to buy this land and some cattle to start a herd, how he'd fought off claim jumpers and nursed an injured wolf pup back to health. The wolf, now half tame, roamed the property and kept predators away from the livestock. "What about my father?" Delilah asked when there was a lull in the conversation. "Blackstone will take everything from him." Kit and Jasper exchanged glances. "We thought of that," Kit said. "I sent word to your father before I came for you. Told him to pack whatever he could carry and meet us here if things went south with Blackstone." "You think he'll come?" Hope flickered in Delilah's chest. "A man who'd sell his daughter ain't likely to choose the hard road," Jasper muttered, then looked chagrined when Kit shot him a warning glance. "We'll see," Kit said diplomatically. "The important thing is that you're safe." Later, as night fell and Jasper snored by the fire, Kit showed Delilah to the sleeping area. A bed with a straw mattress covered in clean linens took up most of the space. "You'll sleep here," Kit said. "I'll bunk with Jasper by the fire." Delilah looked at the bed, then back at Kit, a question in her eyes. "This isn't how I imagined bringing you home," Kit said softly, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "When I left Lyndon, I promised myself I'd come back for you only when I had something to offer. A future. Security. And now? She whispered. Now we're fugitives, he admitted with a wry smile. Blackstone won't let this go. But I swear to you, Delilah, I will protect you with my life. I believe you, she said. And she did. She had always trusted Kit Williams, from the time they were children stealing apples from Old Man Guthrie's orchard to their first kiss behind the schoolhouse when she was 16 and he was 17. Kit hesitated, then leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Delilah met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that spoke of years of longing and promises kept. His hands cupped her face with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kit pressed his forehead to hers. "Get some rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." But as Delilah lay in bed that night, still wearing her wedding dress for lack of any other clothing, she knew that whatever came next, Blackstone's revenge, the hardships of frontier life, the uncertainty of their future, she would face it gladly with Kit by her side. Dawn broke with the distant sound of hoofbeats. Kit was instantly awake, grabbing his rifle from beside the door and moving to the window. Jasper was already up, peering through a crack in the shutters, his old Spencer carbine ready. "3 riders," the old man reported, "coming in from the east." Delilah emerged from behind the curtain, hair tousled from sleep, still in her crumpled wedding gown. "Is it Blackstone?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Kit squinted into the rising sun. "Can't tell yet, but they're not trying to hide their approach." He handed Delilah a pistol. "You remember how to use this?" She nodded, taking the weapon. Kit had taught her to shoot years ago, much to her father's dismay. "Let's hope I don't have to." As the riders drew closer, Kit relaxed slightly. "It's your father," he told Delilah, "and looks like the Jennings brothers with him." Relief flooded Delilah's face. The Jennings, Tom, and Ezra had worked on her father's ranch for years, more like family than hired hands. They met the newcomers outside, Kit and Jasper keeping their weapons ready but not aimed. Thomas Smith looked haggard, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or tears or both. When he saw Delilah, he dismounted clumsily and stumbled toward her. "Thank God you're safe," he said, his voice breaking. Delilah hesitated, the hurt of his betrayal still fresh, but then stepped forward to embrace him. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't deserve to," Thomas admitted. "What I did, trying to force you into that marriage. I'll never forgive myself." "Blackstone's on the war path," Tom Jennings interrupted, a stocky man with a perpetually sunburned face. "Burned the ranch house to the ground last night." "What?" Delilah gasped. "Said it was payment for breaking the contract," Ezra, the younger Jennings brother, added. "Sheriff didn't lift a finger to stop him." "We managed to get the horses and cattle out first," Thomas said. "Drove them here following your directions." He nodded to Kit. "They're about a mile back with some of the other hands who chose to come with us rather than stay in Blackstone's Lyndon." Kit's expression was grim but unsurprised. "You're all welcome here. We've got enough land for the cattle, and with extra hands we can build more shelters before winter." "Blackstone will follow," Jasper warned. "Let him," Kit replied, his hand moving unconsciously to his holster. "This is my land, legally filed and paid for. Not even Victor Blackstone can change that." Over the next few days, the small homestead transformed into a bustling camp. The men erected tents for temporary shelter and began cutting logs for additional cabins. The cattle were integrated with Kit's smaller herd, and a proper corral was built for the horses. Women and children from 3 families who had worked for Thomas Smith settled in, bringing with them whatever possessions they'd managed to save before fleeing Lyndon. Delilah, now dressed in borrowed clothes that were far more practical than her wedding gown, threw herself into organizing their growing community. She set up a makeshift kitchen, established a schedule for laundry and cooking duties, and began planning a garden that would supplement their provisions. Kit watched her with undisguised admiration. "You're a natural leader," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. I had practiced running the ranch while father grieved for mother, she said without bitterness. Someone had to keep things going. I'm sorry I wasn't there, Kit said, taking her hand. You're here now, she replied, squeezing his fingers. That's what matters. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Jasper, who approached from the direction of the creek, rifle in hand. Rider coming in, just one, moving slow. Kit stood, his posture alert but not alarmed. Friend or foe? Neither, I reckon, Jasper said. It's that newspaper fellow from Lyndon, Daniel Parker. Daniel Parker was the owner and editor of the Lyndon Gazette, a surprisingly progressive paper for a frontier town. He had never been particularly friendly with Blackstone, publishing articles that occasionally questioned the businessman's ethics, but he had never openly opposed him either. The journalist rode into camp on a tired-looking mare, his city clothes dusty from travel. He carried a satchel and a camera equipment case, looking more like a traveling salesman than a threat. Mr. Williams, he called, raising his hat. Miss Smith, I hope I'm not unwelcome. Kit stepped forward, extending a hand to help the man dismount. Depends on your business here, Mr. Parker. Information, Parker said, shaking Kit's hand firmly. And perhaps a place to stay for a night or two. Lyndon has become uncomfortable for those not in Blackstone's good graces. What happened? Delilah asked, concern etched on her face. Parker's expression darkened. After your dramatic exit, Miss Smith, I published an account of the events, called it Love Triumphs Over Tyranny. Blackstone didn't appreciate the headline. He gestured to a bruise on his jaw. His men paid me a visit, destroyed my press, and suggested I find a new town to report on. So you came here? Kit asked skeptically. I followed the story, Parker said simply. What's happening here? People standing up to Blackstone, building something new that's news, the kind of news people in other towns should hear. Thomas Smith joined them, regarding the journalist warily. News travels. If you write about us, Blackstone will know exactly where to find us. He already knows, Parker countered. He's offering a reward for information on your whereabouts, but he's hesitant to make a move without the law on his side. That's why I'm here to help ensure public opinion remains with you. Kit and Thomas exchanged glances. Finally, Kit nodded. You can stay. But understand this, these people are under my protection. I won't have their stories twisted or their privacy violated for the sake of selling papers. Fair enough, Parker agreed. I simply want to document the truth. That night, around the communal fire, Parker interviewed various members of their growing settlement. He photographed the buildings under construction, the cattle grazing peacefully, and the children playing despite the uncertainty of their situation. But his most striking image was of Kit and Delilah, standing hand in hand against the sunset, looking toward the future they hoped to build. 2 weeks passed without word from Lyndon. The settlement, which they had begun calling New Hope, took shape rapidly. 2 additional cabins were completed, with foundations laid for 3 more. A small schoolhouse was under construction, with Delilah volunteering to teach the children. The garden she had planned was planted, though it would be some time before it yielded a harvest. Daniel Parker had departed after 3 days, promising to publish his story in papers throughout Kansas and neighboring states. The court of public opinion can be more powerful than any judge's gavel, he had said before riding out. Kit and Delilah found moments of privacy amid the constant activity, their relationship deepening as they worked side by side to build their community. Each evening, they would walk to the creek, ostensibly to check the water level, but really to steal kisses away from prying eyes. When all this settles, Kit told her during one such walk, I want to do things properly, court you the way you deserve. Delilah laughed, a sound that still surprised her given everything they'd been through. I think we're well past the courting stage, Kit Williams. Nevertheless, he insisted, some things should be done right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. I've been carrying this since Colorado. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, a small sapphire set in silver. It reminded me of your eyes, Kit said, suddenly looking as nervous as the boy who had first asked her to dance at the Harvest Festival years ago. Is this a proposal? Delilah asked, her heart racing. It's a promise, Kit replied, that when we're safe, when new hope is established, I'll ask you properly, with your father's blessing and a preacher standing by. If you'll have me. I will, Delilah said without hesitation. I would have followed you west 2 years ago if you'd asked. Kit slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. I love you. Lila, he whispered against her lips, I have since we were kids. And I love you, she replied, through whatever comes next. What came next arrived the following morning with a cloud of dust on the horizon. Jasper, who had taken to keeping watch from a hastily constructed lookout tower, called the alarm. Riders coming, at least a dozen. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Women gathered children into the most solid buildings, men checked weapons and took positions, and Kit organized a defense perimeter with the experienced efficiency of someone who had fought for his survival before. Delilah, Kit called, get everyone who can't fight into the root cellar behind the main cabin. She nodded, already moving to carry out his instructions, the ring on her finger catching the morning light. Through his spyglass, Kit confirmed their worst fears. It's Blackstone, he announced grimly, and he's brought the sheriff in what looks like hired guns. Thomas Smith joined Kit at the barricade they had erected, rifle in hand. This is my fight too, he said, his voice steady. More mine than yours. I'm the one who made the deal with the devil. Kit clapped him on the shoulder. We're family now. Your fights are mine. The riders approached slowly, clearly visible now across the open prairie. Victor Blackstone led them, his bulk unmistakable even at a distance. Beside him rode Sheriff Mills, looking uncomfortable in his official capacity. Behind them came a collection of hard-faced men, guns prominently displayed. They stopped just outside rifle range. Blackstone raised a white handkerchief in a mocking gesture of parley. What now? Thomas asked quietly. Now we talk, Kit replied, and hope it doesn't come to shooting. Kit stepped out from behind the barricade, his rifle lowered but ready. That's far enough, Blackstone, he called. The businessman urged his horse forward a few more paces, ignoring Kit's warning. I've come for what's mine, Williams, he shouted, the girl and the cattle that Smith owes me. There's nothing here that belongs to you, Kit replied evenly. Miss Smith is a free woman, and the cattle are the property of those who raise them. Blackstone's face reddened with anger. I have a contract legally binding. Sheriff Mills is here to enforce it. The sheriff nudged his horse forward, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Now, see here, Williams, we don't want any bloodshed. Just turn over the Smith girl and the property that's rightfully Mr. Blackstone's, and we'll be on our way. The law doesn't work that way, Sheriff, and you know it, Kit called back. You can't force a woman to marry against her will, contract or no contract. As for the cattle, any agreement was voided when Blackstone burned down the Smith ranch. This news seemed to surprise the sheriff, who glanced sharply at Blackstone. Taking advantage of the moment, Kit continued. I suggest you turn around and ride back to Lyndon. This is legally filed homestead land. You have no jurisdiction here. Blackstone sneered. Your legal claims won't mean much when you're dead, boy. But before he could say more, a new sound drew everyone's attention, the rhythmic pounding of the hooves approaching from the west. All eyes turned to see a dust cloud resolving into a column of riders, at least 20 strong, led by a man in a U.S. Marshal's coat. What the hell? Blackstone muttered, clearly caught off guard. The newcomers rode directly to the space between the two groups. The marshal, a weathered man with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. Marshal Robert Thornton, he announced. Would someone care to explain what's happening here? Before anyone else could speak, a familiar voice called out, I can explain, Marshal. Daniel Parker emerged from among the riders, camera in hand. Victor Blackstone here is attempting to enforce an illegal marriage contract and steal property through intimidation and threats. That's a damn lie, Blackstone blustered. Is it? Parker countered. I have sworn statements from a dozen witnesses about how you coerced Thomas Smith into signing his daughter over to you. I have evidence of your burning down the Smith ranch in retribution, and I have the testimony of your previous wife's maid about the circumstances of Sarah Burns's death. Sheriff Mills paled visibly at this last revelation, edging his horse away from Blackstone. The marshal turned to Blackstone. "Is this true?" "These are private matters," Blackstone insisted. "Nothing for a federal marshal to concern himself with. Attempted forced marriage, arson, and possible murder sound like matters for the law to me," Thornton replied coldly. "Not to mention crossing county lines with armed men to threaten homesteaders." One of Blackstone's hired guns, sensing which way the wind was blowing, quietly began backing his horse away from the confrontation. "Parker brought me these allegations 2 days ago," the marshal continued. "Normally I'd investigate before acting, but when he received word that you were gathering men for a raid, I decided more immediate action was warranted." Blackstone's face contorted with rage. He reached for his gun, but the marshal was faster, his revolver appearing in his hand as if by magic. "I wouldn't," Thornton warned quietly. "Victor Blackstone, you're under arrest on suspicion of multiple crimes. We'll sort the details out back in Topeka." For a moment, it seemed Blackstone might still attempt something desperate, but looking at the marshal's unwavering gun, the line of deputies behind him, and the determined faces of the New Hope settlers, he slowly raised his hands. "This isn't over," he growled, glaring at Kit and Delilah, who had emerged from the settlement to stand beside the man she loved. "Yes," Kit said firmly, his arm around Delilah's shoulders. "It is." As Marshal Thornton and his deputies took Blackstone and his more reluctant men into custody, Sheriff Mills approached Kit and Delilah, hat in hand. "I never knew about Sarah Burns," he said quietly. "I suspected, but I let myself be bought. I'm not proud of it." He looked at Delilah. "I'm sorry, Miss Smith." "For everything." Delilah regarded him coolly. "Actions have consequences, Sheriff. Remember that when you return to Lyndon." Mills nodded, his shoulders slumped. "I'll be resigning my badge. Town deserves better." As the law officers departed with their prisoners, Daniel Parker approached with a satisfied smile. "Told you public opinion could be powerful," he said. "Once my story ran in the Topeka paper, the marshal couldn't ignore it." "You risked a lot," Kit acknowledged, extending his hand to the journalist. "We owe you our thanks." "Just doing my job," Parker replied, shaking Kit's hand warmly. "Afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted, as they say." He glanced around at the settlement. "You've built something remarkable here. Mind if I stay on a while longer? I think the story of New Hope is just beginning." 3 months later, the first snowfall dusted New Hope like powdered sugar on a cake. The settlement had grown to nearly 30 people, with solid cabins replacing tents and a schoolhouse completed just in time for winter lessons. Thomas Smith had rediscovered his purpose, managing the expanded cattle herd with the Jennings brothers. Jasper had postponed his Oregon plans indefinitely, claiming the winters would be too hard on his old bones, but everyone knew he had found a family among them. On the first clear Sunday in December, the entire community gathered in the schoolhouse, which doubled as their church. Wildflowers, preserved by Delilah and the other women, decorated the simple space, and candles provided warm light against the early winter darkness. Kit Williams stood at the front, wearing the only suit he owned, his normally unruly hair combed neatly. Beside him, the circuit preacher waited with a Bible in hand. When Delilah entered on her father's arm, a hush fell over the assembled friends and neighbors. She wore a dress of deep blue that matched the sapphire on her finger, sewn by the women of New Hope as a wedding gift. Her dark hair was adorned with a crown of dried wildflowers, and her eyes shone with unshed tears of joy. As Thomas placed his daughter's hand in Kit's, he whispered, "I don't deserve this honor." "You're still my father," Delilah replied softly, "and you found your way back to the man I remember." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Kit and Delilah exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not just of love and faithfulness, but of partnership in building their shared vision for New Hope. "I take you as my husband," Delilah said, her voice clear and strong, "not as a savior or protector, though you have been both, but as my equal, my partner, and my dearest friend." "I take you as my wife," Kit replied, holding her hands in his, "not as a possession or prize, but as my heart's companion, my strength in hard times, and my joy in good ones." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered community rattled the schoolhouse windows. Daniel Parker, who had indeed stayed to document New Hope's growth, captured the moment with his camera the newlyweds framed by their friends and the future they were all building together. The celebration continued well into the night, with fiddle music, dancing, and enough food to make everyone forget the coming winter hardships. Kit and Delilah slipped away as the moon rose high, heading to their cabin, which had been decorated with ribbons and well wishes by the settlement's children. "Mrs. Williams," Kit said softly as he carried her across the threshold, "has a nice ring to it." "Better than Mrs. Blackstone." "Certainly," Delilah replied with a smile, then grew serious. "Have you heard the news from Topeka?" Kit nodded, setting her gently on her feet. "Blackstone was convicted of Sarah's murder. He'll hang after the new year." "I don't take pleasure in anyone's death," Delilah said, "but knowing he can never hurt anyone again, it's a relief." "The marshal says Lyndon is changing already," Kit told her, unwinding the ribbon from her hair. "New leadership, honest sheriff. Your father's land is legally his again, though I don't think he has any plans to return." "This is home now," Delilah agreed, helping Kit remove his jacket. "For all of us." As winter settled over the prairie, New Hope lived up to its name. The community faced blizzards and food shortages, but they faced them together. Kit and Delilah's cabin became the heart of the settlement, a place where decisions were made, disputes settled, and celebrations centered. By spring, when the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow, Delilah had news of her own to share. She told Kit one morning as they watched the sunrise from their porch. "A baby?" he repeated, his face transforming with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "When?" "Late summer, the doctor thinks," she said, covering his hand with hers. "Just in time for harvest." Kit pulled her into his arms, laughing with pure joy. "I love you, Lila Williams, more than I ever thought possible. As New Hope bloomed with the spring, so did news of its success. Daniel Parker's articles had attracted more settlers, families looking for a fresh start away from the corruption and constraints of established towns. By summer, they had a proper main street with a general store, a real church, and plans for a proper schoolhouse to replace the one they had outgrown. Thomas Smith, watching his daughter's happiness and the community they had built from adversity, finally found peace with his past mistakes. One evening, as he sat with Kit on the porch of the home they had built for him adjacent to the young couple's cabin, he confessed, "I never thought I'd say this, but Blackstone forcing that marriage was the best thing that could have happened." Kit raised an eyebrow. "How do you figure that?" "Because it brought you back to Lyndon," Thomas explained. "It forced me to see what I had become. And it gave Delilah the chance to choose her own path instead of the one I was pushing her down out of fear." From inside the cabin, they heard Delilah humming as she prepared dinner, her voice occasionally breaking into soft laughter as she spoke to the child growing within her. "Life has a way of working out," Kit agreed, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. "Not always the way we expect, but often the way we need." August brought scorching heat, and to the joy of the entire settlement, a son for Kit and Delilah. James Thomas Williams arrived during a thunderstorm that broke a 2-week drought, his lusty cries harmonizing with the rain drumming on the cabin roof. "He has your eyes," Delilah murmured as she cradled their newborn, exhausted but radiant. "And your spirit," Kit replied, gently touching the dark fuzz on his son's head. "Poor boy won't know a moment's peace with that combination." As baby James grew, so did New Hope. By his first birthday, the settlement had become a proper town, with regular stagecoach service connecting them to Topeka and points west. Daniel Parker established a permanent newspaper office, the New Hope Herald, chronicling the town's growth and occasionally publishing stories about life in the wider territories that brought a taste of adventure to those who had settled into more domestic pursuits. Kit expanded their ranch operations, breeding horses that gained a reputation throughout Kansas for their strength and intelligence. Delilah, once James was weaned, returned to teaching part-time, passing on her love of learning to a new generation of frontier children. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Kit's mother, arrived 2 years after James, with considerably less drama but no less joy. Where James was boisterous and adventurous from his first steps, Sarah was thoughtful and observant, watching the world with her mother's sapphire eyes and her father's patient smile. 5 years after their wedding, on the anniversary of the day Kit had broken down the church doors to stop Delilah's forced marriage, they hosted a celebration for the entire town. Tables groaned with food, a dance floor was laid in the town square, and lanterns hung from every available tree and post. As twilight fell and music filled the air, Kit led his wife onto the dance floor for a waltz. "Remember the harvest dance when we were 17?" he asked, spinning her gently. "How could I forget? You stepped on my toes 3 times and apologized so profusely that Mrs. Holloway thought you were proposing." Kit laughed, drawing her closer. "I wanted to even then, I just didn't have the courage." "You found it eventually," Delilah said softly, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "When it mattered most." From the edge of the dance floor, 4-year-old James watched with wide eyes as his parents moved in perfect harmony. Beside him, 2-year-old Sarah clapped her small hands in delight. Thomas Smith sat nearby, his weathered face peaceful as he watched his grandchildren and the community that had become his second chance. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the celebration had wound down to a few lingering conversations around dying bonfires, Kit and Delilah stood on the porch of their home, no longer a rough cabin, but a proper house, though still modest by some standards. "I want to show you something," Kit said, taking her hand and leading her to the old oak tree that stood at the edge of their property. In the moonlight, Delilah could see that he had carved something into the trunk. Leaning closer, she made out their initials and a date the day he had rescued her from Blackstone's clutches. "I did this the night we arrived here," Kit explained, "a promise to myself that no matter what happened, I would never let you go again." Delilah traced the carving with her fingers, then turned to her husband with tears in her eyes. "You never will," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Some things are meant to be, no matter what stands in their way." As they walked back to their home, hand in hand, the stars spread like diamonds across the Kansas sky, Delilah thought about the journey that had brought them here from a forced marriage, narrowly avoided, to a life freely chosen, built on love and determination rather than fear and obligation. New Hope had lived up to its name, offering second chances not just to Kit and Delilah, but to everyone who had found their way there. From Thomas Smith's redemption to Sheriff Mills, who had returned a year ago to serve as the town's deputy under a more honorable badge, to the families who had followed them from Lyndon, seeking a fresh start. Even Victor Blackstone, whose hanging had ultimately been commuted to life imprisonment due to new evidence, had served a purpose in their story. His cruelty had been the catalyst that brought Kit home and forced Delilah to fight for her future rather than surrendering to circumstance. As they closed the door behind them, shutting out the world for another night, Kit drew Delilah into his arms. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Williams," he murmured against her hair. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Williams," she replied, her heart full. "Here's to many more." And there would be many more years of watching their children grow, of building their community, of facing hardships and celebrating joys together. The road ahead would not always be easy, but it would be theirs to travel side by side, a journey begun the moment Kit Williams had crashed through church doors to reclaim not just the woman he loved, but the future they both deserved. In the years that followed, New Hope continued to thrive. The railroad came through in 1886, bringing new opportunities and connecting them more firmly to the wider world. James, inheriting his father's adventurous spirit, would eventually attend university in Boston, before returning to help manage the family's now considerable ranching operations. Sarah, with her mother's intelligence and determination, would become one of the first female doctors in Kansas, establishing a practice that served the town and surrounding homesteads. Thomas Smith lived to see his great-grandchildren passing peacefully in the winter of 1895, with Delilah holding his hand and Kit standing steadfast beside her. In his final moments, he whispered, "You were right to fight for your happiness, daughter. I'm proud of you." Through it all, the drought years and the prosperous ones, the joys and sorrows that make up any life, Kit and Delilah's love remained the bedrock upon which everything else was built. Each evening, no matter how busy their days, they would take time to watch the sunset together, remembering the frightened bride and determined cowboy who had faced down a tyrant and chosen freedom, regardless of the cost. And if, in their twilight years, visitors to New Hope noticed an elderly couple dancing slowly on their porch as dusk fell, they would smile and whisper the story that had become legend in those parts of a love strong enough to break down doors, brave enough to build a new world, and true enough to last a lifetime.